Chelsea. This is my channel, The Fancy Cat Lady Reads. I'm wearing one of my fancy booktube hats, and today I'm bringing you a Top 5 Wednesday video. Top 5 Wednesday is a Goodreads group originally created by Lainey from Ginger Reads Lainey, currently moderated by Sam from Thoughts on Tomes. Every week there's a different topic, and you can pick 5 books that fit that topic to feature on your YouTube channel or blog or wherever you recommend books. So the November topics went up pretty late this month. They only went up today, so this was a fairly last-minute decision for me to do this video, even though I don't have time to do this video today because this topic for today is genre-bending books, and like that is me, that is where I live. This is my thing. I mean, obviously it's not my only thing, but it's definitely like one of my things. I think that genre bending is one of the very few catchphrases that will like immediately draw my attention to a book regardless. As an SFF reader, I think that things that mash up these genres in different and unexpected ways are particularly fun. So I've arranged these books from like kind of more normal to kind of more bizarre, and we'll get more and more weird as we go. I'll acknowledge that even though blends between like speculative and non-speculative genres, like something that's literary fiction or general fiction that has a fantastical or science fictional element to it, are genre benders. They're not the books that I think of as genre benders, and there aren't really going to be any of those on this list. As an SFF reader, I kind of think of those books as being like, oh, you didn't want to commit to speculative fiction. That's okay. And I know that's a little condescending and it's not necessarily accurate, but one other genre that I do think of as genre blending when it's mixed with a story that is either fantasy or science fiction is mystery. And I missed out on last month's monthly recommendations topic, which was for mysteries. In part because I just didn't have the time to film that video, and in part because, as I've acknowledged lately in other videos, I think, I have a lot of mystery series that I feel like I want to read, but I am really in an SFF reading mood these days, so even though I want to read all of these mystery books, they're not what I actually want to pick up right now. So I would have been recommending things that I read a long time ago and I've already talked about several other times since, or I would have done a video that was just fantasy mystery, which I kind of wanted to do, but I didn't feel like I had quite enough things to talk about for that. But the first book I want to talk about here is going to be one of those fantasy mysteries, and that is The Lie Tree by Frances Hardinge. This is, as I've said before, what I think of as a historical mystery first and a fantasy novel second. It is YA historical fiction, and it then becomes a murder mystery. And then after it becomes a murder mystery, it adds a fantasy element of the lie tree of the title. But it's structured as a mystery, and it's set in a historical fiction setting that isn't otherwise alt-historical or fantastical, except for the existence of the lie tree in this story. And Frances Hardinge is known as a children's and YA fantasy author. In fact, I just read A Face Like Glass by her, which I absolutely loved, but it's 100% middle grade fantasy. I don't necessarily think of this as that. I think of this more as a historical mystery. So that was the least weird of all the books I'm going to be talking about here. We're going to get weirder now. The next book, however, I think of as weird more because of the writing style and less because of the actual blend of genre elements. And that is All the Birds in the Sky by Charlie Jane Anders. Now, the genre elements blended here are pretty straightforward. This has a near-future science fiction climate change disaster storyline going on, but also one of the main characters is a witch and went to a magic school, and there's like the secret society of witches who know about magic, but like the rest of the normal people aren't allowed to know that there's magic. That's a pretty standard fantasy trope, but not necessarily one that we often see in a science fictional setting. What makes this a weird book, and what I think turns off a lot of people who don't get along with it, because I know a lot of people who really didn't like this book, is the writing style. It is sort of twee, I would say, even though there are a lot of terrible things that happen in this story. Everything is kind of presented in this off-kilter, eccentric way. I enjoyed that immensely about this book, but I don't think that everyone will. Are you ready to get even weirder? We're going to get weirder. Next, I want to talk about The Just City by Jo Walton, which is the first in a trilogy. Really, I'm going to be talking about the whole trilogy here because The Just City, the first book in the trilogy, is pretty straightforwardly a fantasy novel, but you see bits of the things that are going to get very science fictional in the rest of the series. The second book is The Philosopher Kings, and the third book is Necessity, and by the end of this series, it is a total genre bender. So this is all about an attempt to create Plato's Republic that is the brainchild of the goddess Athena. So it's a mythology-based fantasy novel. The gods in this exist outside of time, so they're able to go through time and pluck things from different places in time to make this happen. So it's also got a time travel element off the bat that allows for things like robots in Plato's Republic. The robots and artificial intelligence are a major theme from the beginning of this story, and then by the end, there are, alien gods and dinosaurs and all sorts of historical time periods and lots of philosophy. So even though this is a blend of fantasy and science fiction, which is fairly straightforward, it's a much more eclectic blend than I think you would normally see. And as we continue to get even weirder, I want to talk about Welcome to Night Vale by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Cranor. This is the first of now 2 tie-in novels to the Welcome to Night Vale podcast, but it can be read as a standalone. I would suggest, though, checking out the podcast to see if it's kind of your thing. There are things in the novel that tie in to certain events that happen at certain points in the podcast's storyline, but the story stands on its own. I think of Night Vale as being like comedic horror. But if I had to put one genre on this, I think it would be urban fantasy. If I remember correctly, the storyline of this book also had a mystery element. It's definitely getting into what the heck is this, I don't really want to put a genre on it territory. Night Vale is a sleepy little desert town in which all sorts of arcane terrors are everyday commonplace occurrences, and people just go about their normal lives regardless, having normal people struggles. And it's a hilarious juxtaposition and also frequently used to incredibly poignant effect. I spent last month, October, catching up on like months and months of the Night Vale podcast because I hadn't listened to it since like the end of 2016, so there was a lot to catch up on, and it's, good for Halloween season. Now that I am almost caught up, I'm thinking that I may want to read the second Night Vale novel that has just been released that is called It Devours. I'm very curious about this. It's supposed to be another standalone story that has to do with the clash between science and religion, but I can't recommend it because I haven't read it yet. And then the last book on this list is one of the weirdest books I own, I say joyfully, and that is Radiance by Catherynne and Valente. If you were to just describe the world in which this takes place, it would be pretty straightforward that this is alt history sci-fi. Of course, there's a little bit of debate as to whether alt history is more sci-fi or more fantasy to begin with. This is decopunk, so alternate 20th century in which there is space travel and the planets are inhabitable, so it's not our world or any world that could have been based on actual events. It's not a scientifically plausible world, but space travel alt history is generally thought of as sci-fi. But I think that to say that's what this book is and that setting is how you would classify this is a little bit inaccurate. This is a book about filmmaking and about narrative and storytelling, and it has different layers of storytelling within it. And I think one of the questions that it asks is, how real are these various stories and narratives? And I think it's ultimately important to that theme that it is set overall in a world that is blatantly unreal. This book also uses an incredible ton of mythology, which is traditionally more of a fantasy thing than a science fiction thing. And ultimately, I think one of the things it is about genre, because this features storytellers within the story who work and make films and other media in different genres. And this is a mixed format book that uses like screenplays and interviews, things that are written by the characters in this story, stories that exist within this world, and as such, a lot of the pieces of this book are written in different genres. This is weird enough and meta enough that to just call it alt history, sci-fi, seems really, really reductive, but I don't know what else I would call it. This is one of those books that I feel sort of defies genre entirely, in part by deciding that genre is one of the things it's going to talk about. It's definitely speculative, I'll give you that. I like things where I can just say, oh, it's speculative fiction. Anyhow, these are my books for this Top 5 Wednesday topic of genre benders. If you have any particularly weird genre benders that you would like to recommend to me, please do. I do not have enough genre benders in my life. There is no such thing as too many genre benders. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what you think. I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.